What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. All right, so this is a video that I think I said something about this. May have been my Patreon. I was going to do this. Now that the fallout has settled a bit more, and the scope of Kamala Harris's loss is now being realized and analyzed. In my opinion, she is the worst Democratic presidential candidate since Walter Mondale. And even that may be a bit much for me to say, because Walter Mondale was a great political figure. He was an exceptional vice president, one of the best vice presidents this country's ever had. If you do your research on this, I'm talking about. And he was a great legislator out of the state of Minnesota for many decades. He was a worthy successor to Hubert Horatio Humphrey. The problem is that he just ran for president at the very wrong time in this country history. He was running against Ronald Reagan, who was a transformative figure in American politics. Ronald Reagan was at the peak of his popularity in 1984. He had an approval rating around 60%. Morning in America, Reagan was running on the opinion of many that the country was better off 4 years later from 1980. Remember, he asked the audience at that debate, the only debate between him and Jimmy Carter, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? Most Americans said we weren't better off than we were in 1976, but in 1984, he was then asking, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Now, generally, many Americans will tell you, yeah, we were. And they reelected Ronald Reagan in a 49-state landslide, one of the biggest electoral blowouts, if not the biggest electoral blowout of all time. But there were many Americans who said no. 37 million Americans voted for Walter Mondale. The problem is 54 million voted for Reagan. But Reagan had his detractors. Most African Americans felt the pain. The federal government made cuts to many social programs, which hurt those who were poor. The amount of homelessness that plagued this country increased exponentially during his administration. The same thing happened with the prison industrial complex. Many people, disproportionately the poor and Black, were imprisoned for crimes that their white counterparts were not. Their sentences were much more lengthy than their white counterparts. This isn't me playing race card, it's just facts. Laws were implemented with the help of a Democratic Congress, I might add, that made drug penalties much tougher. Not to mention the CIA was funneling these drugs into the Black communities or inner cities, helping to create, by design, the crack epidemic, which, of course, many of these politicians who were wearing these, Brooks Brothers suits and pretending to be moral, upstanding citizens, were behind the scenes profiting from drug trafficking. I'm not going to say any names on here, but you can do your research to see what I'm talking about. And it goes way up to the top of the federal government. And all of that stuff, man, income disparity increase, all of that. But anyway, I think she performed worse than any candidate on the Democratic Party since then. Now, some might say, well, wait a minute. She did a lot better in electoral vote than Michael Dukakis. She did. But the thing about it was, even though Michael Dukakis had that huge lead during the Democratic convention, you pretty much got the impression that from September on, the caucus was toast. You just knew that he wasn't going to beat George Bush. Just once Bush got negative in his campaign, once Bush uh, broke out of the wimp image, that was one of the best run campaigns ever. It was negative, but it's one of the best running presidential campaigns ever. I can't say Donald Trump ran a great campaign. They made a lot of mistakes. You heard me criticize. It seemed like after he was, hit at on July 13th, their campaign went through a nosedive. Things turned around after the great performance by J.D. Vance at the debate, but then over the last couple of weeks, they were floundered. But Kamala Harris was just a terrible terrible campaigner. She's not a great orator. She ducked interviews. We saw that. When she did do interviews, they were tightly controlled. Many of the interviews, including the infamous 60 Minutes interview, it was heavily edited. We caught them editing the footage so that they put an answer that she gave to another question in place of one of those massive word salads, the big word salad that she gave to a question. She didn't really, and then, just the message of the Democratic Party. One of the things that bothers me about them, among other things, is the Democratic Party used to be the protectors of the proletariat. The Democratic Party used to be the party for the working class. That began to shift, I would say, sometime in the late 90s, maybe the 90s, but definitely in the 2000s, where the Republican Party, which was always the party of the elites, and they still are, both parties are still generally the party of the elites. They're still the party of the elites. But the perception is the Republican Party is more of the party of the working class. And there's different factors involved in that. But ultimately, it has a lot to do with the way wealth is acquired in this country. The biggest industries where you had the biggest barons in this country used to be like the steel industry, the automobile industry, oil industry, tobacco. Generally speaking, especially steel, oil, and tobacco, those individuals tended to be more conservative, right? Those who ran those industries, they tend to be more conservative. The thing is now, most of your millionaires and billionaires, the majority of them, have a higher educational background. They have these master degrees, these bachelor degrees. And a lot of them are from tech industries. Now you have the Elon Musk and your Jeff Bezos, but a lot of these people, they tend to be more liberal. So now the money has shifted. The money has shifted more toward Democrats. That's why Kamala Harris was able to amass this $1 billion plus money pot. You know what I mean? Trump got money too, hundreds of millions, but it wasn't as much. When I was growing up, Republicans used to own the Democrats when it came to their war chest during these campaigns. But that shift has happened. And now the Democratic Party is perceived to be the party of the bourgeoisie. It's no longer the party of the downtrodden. Trump masquerades or cosplays as this champion of the working man. Well, he's not. Not really, but the dude eats fast food, eats KFC, Popeyes, McDonald's. The masses can relate to that, while the Democrats are sipping their lattes and they go to Broadway shows. They're like the Democratic versions of Niles and Frazier. Most Americans can't really relate to that, And then it's just they're just on the wrong side of many issues. Now, I don't want to get into specifics, but they're just on the wrong side of so many different issues. But let's talk about the numbers for a second. Right now, with 54% of the vote counted in California, Donald Trump has over 40% of the vote. He's flipped numerous counties in California. Now, that might not sound like much because Kamala still has 57% of the vote. But remember, California is the bluest state in the union. The bluest state. The only electoral unit that's bluer than California is Washington, D.C. I'm curious to see what Washington, D.C. looks like. But anyway, that's not only is it the bluest state in the union, that's your home state. If Biden got 64% of the vote in 2020, surely California should have went close to 70% for Kamala Harris, but it did not. This was a massive repudiation of Kamala Harris. A lot of it has to do with the rightward lurch of Hispanics. Absolutely. I've read about a small town near the Texas border that for 128 years had voted Democratic. They voted Democratic for what, since 128 years? What is that? Since 1896, they voted Democratic. This is the first time they voted Republican, and Hispanics make up 90% of that town. So this is a huge rebuke of the Democratic Party and Kamala Harris. I don't think it's just Kamala. I think this is a massive rebuke of the Democratic Party as a whole. I'm gonna tell you something. I haven't seen the final figures yet, but Joe Biden won only about, depending upon what figures you look at, because some say 477, but the figures that I tend to accept, Joe Biden only won 509 counties in 2020. That's the fewest amount of counties ever won by a presidential candidate who went on to win the presidency. Now, that has a lot to do with the fact that population centers have shifted. Basically, what I'm saying is millions and millions of people live in these counties. It's like the poor people are all bunched up together. All of us like live in these. Not saying I'm poor, I'm not, but I'm not definitely not goddamn rich. But we're all bunched into these little units, townhouses and apartments and houses that are just, several feet away, maybe 25 feet, 30, well, not 25 feet, but I say maybe 30, 35 feet spaced away, right? Right. Whereas rich people, they live in these huge mansions where they're far, far away from others. And even and not just rich people, in a lot of red areas, there's just not a lot of people living in there. So that's why it looks like the way it does. But still, I wouldn't be surprised if Kamala Harris won the fewest amount of counties for a presidential candidate since Walter Mondale. I think Mondale won like 380 counties or something, 350, something like that. I wouldn't be surprised if she won at most 400 counties. Yeah, she got 226 electoral votes, but this was a horrible performance, considering that there were some people who was thinking she could get 330, 340 electoral votes. This was a devastatingly horrible performance. Uh, I just saw Maine was called for Kamala, but Trump got electoral vote out of Maine. He got 46% of the vote there. Last time I checked, Illinois, I think Trump had like 45, 46% of the vote there. In the state of New York, uh, I think everywhere in the state of New York, even the ones that Kamala won, they all trended red. Trump got like 44% of the vote in New York. I think like 46% of the vote in New Jersey. Matter of fact, let me check Washington, D.C. Let me check something. Washington, D.C. Now, she may have made gains in D.C. Let's see. In 2020, Joe Biden got 92.2% of the vote in D.C. Trump 5.4%. Hmm. Why don't they? I don't see the votes. I wonder why they're not doing that. I wonder why they're not showing. Let's see. Okay, so they've counted 79% of the vote in DC. Trump has 7% of the vote. So that's a slight edge. That's a slight tick red even in DC. It went from 5% to 7%. So Donald Trump made gains everywhere. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, there's no county in this country where Kamala did better than Joe Biden. So this is a massive repudiation of the Democratic Party. And I was saying this on 78's show earlier. I think the Democrats are going to lose again in 2028, barring some sort of unforeseen calamity or event. Maybe I shouldn't use calamity, but barring some unforeseen events, like, I don't want to say it, but like what happened in 2001 or a war, barring something like that, I think they're going to lose again because they're already trying to push Gavin Newsom, right? Now, to me, in order for the Democrats to win in 2028, they're going to need somebody. They're going to need somebody who I believe is sort of an outsider and sort of centrist, right? I think most of us believe that. But the problem is the Democratic primary, okay? The Democratic primary, this candidate is going to have to come out ahead. Now, the base of the Democratic Party is more to the left. It's the furthest left. The furthest left this party has been maybe ever. I think ever, right? So a Gavin Newsom would more than likely be the favorite in a Democratic primary because he's going to be a natural favorite because of his policies. He's going to be a natural favorite for the Democratic Party faithful. But the problem is going to be in the general election, he's going to have to shift to the center because this isn't a winning strategy. Not to mention the fact that some of these liberals are so delusional, they still think it's all about, oh, they just don't want to vote for a black woman. They don't understand the Democratic Party's policies are the problem. So I think Gavin Newsom, if he does get nominated, if he does, he's going to try to push to the center during the general election. J.D. Vance, if he's a nominee, and by the way, J.D. Vance is a far more polished politician than Trump. So I think he's going to try to put a more acceptable face on Trump's more controversial policies and stances, but make them more palatable. That's his attempt, at least, is going to be. But they're going to have a field day with Gavin Newsom because of his prior record. Because if he tries to say, "Oh, I'm for this and I'm for that, and I'm, reasonable. I'm a Clinton Democrat. I'm in the moderate," they're going to be like, "Man, look at this dude's record, man. Look what he did to California." And do you really want him to do to the nation what he did to California? Look what California was about. So he's going to try to run from that. And it's not going to work. I think and plus, if he tries to appeal too much to the center, it's either going to be a depressed turnout in the election, or he's going to get a challenge from the left, either in the primaries or in the election. And either way, it's going to be a problem because if you can't unite your party, you're not going to win. So that's the thing I see. Because even if you look at the conventional wisdom that, well, Trump is going to unite the Democratic Party. Um, you could make that argument, but not if JD Vance is on the ticket. If JD Vance, because this will be the first time Trump's not going to be on the ticket since 2012. So, and JD Vance, I think, is a much more skilled politician. We saw that in the debate. So that's what I tend to think. Remember, we saw in 2016, Hillary Clinton was the favorite, but Bernie Sanders was speaking for a portion of the Democratic Party, the working class. Maybe on social issues they're liberal, but he spoke more for the downtrodden. The Democratic Party treated him like shit. So they did in 2020. They manipulated the rules to get Sanders out of there. Someone like me was a Bernie Sanders supporter. The Democratic Party has fucked me over, people like me, so many different times that we aren't screwing with them. They've pissed on the proletariat too many times. And that's why they're in the position they're in now. So I'm sorry. To get me back and millions of others, you're going to have to kiss my ass. But you're too proud to do that. So prepare to lose again. But anyway, that's all I got to say about it. Tell me what you guys think.